What if I told you Crazy Dave is a genius? Okay, it's kind of obvious he's not stupid, he's just eccentric. Or crazy, how he likes to put it. I've been wanting to make a video about this, mostly because I like finding things where there is nothing. Or is there nothing? For a while now, I've had this theory that Crazy Dave had a part in making the zombies. And poking around a little bit in each of the games, there's plenty of evidence that helps support that theory. I know, this has to be the most ridiculous game to try to make sense of since Candy Crush, but just bear with me. I know you're pining to know, am I barking up the wrong tree? But I'm not trying to play you for a sap fling. I've compiled a timeline using some evidence throughout the game to help put everything into order. So, begin with the Facebook game. You may not have even noticed, but there was a Facebook game at some point that showed survivors other than Dave. It was in beta a while back, but now the link leads to nothing. In the game, you played as the new resident in town. Your first objective was to obtain a blower Dave created that removes the purple fog from a small area. Note, the purple fog is important to the story. You hear from multiple of the NPCs in the early game that Dave's mental health is beginning to decay more so than usual. Later in the game, you retake more of the plots from the zombies and expand your fogless oasis. At one point, I hit a roadblock where a surviving police officer told me not to head for the city limits because it is unsafe due to zombie density. Other than that, it's pretty much just a Farmville game. I couldn't get too far without having to send out those annoying game invites, so in closing for this game, I would say that it's early in the timeline, mostly because the extra survivors, Dave is starting to decay more so than usual, and you don't really see him decaying in the later games. And there's very little to no mention of Zomboss, at least in the early stages where I played. So it seems like he doesn't have much of a role yet. And off to the second game on the timeline, the original Plants vs. Zombies on mobile. Or computer. Whatever, when I first played it, I played it on Xbox. This is where it all really began. I just want to point out one of the first things you see. Yup, the purple fog on the right side of the screen over the graves where the zombies are pouring out. The zombies sprouting out of the ground where the last plant is supposed to come out. It kind of looks like foreshadowing to me, but I'll get to that later. Main point is them coming out of the fog area. That seems to me very cut and dry. They're coming from the fog. Dave mentions that at one point he was once known as the Fog Man because he used to jump out of the fog and scare people. But I feel this is either him hiding the true meaning or he doesn't actually remember it. But that seems like a hint that he has something to do with the fog. That may be a leap, but I don't know. This is where most came into the game, where a crazy man named Dave sold you, his neighbor, plans to survive and defend your home. But what if I told you there is no neighbor? I know what you're thinking. What about the no? That could easily be Dave. And look at the houses in PvZ 1 and then the trailer for PvZ 2, It's About Time. They both are pretty similar with no other houses nearby that match the description even remotely. The most definitive reason I'm to think there's no neighbor in PvZ 1 is why would Zomboss feel so threatened by just some other dude that Crazy Dave supplied with plants to come over personally to be defeated? My theory is that there was a neighbor before, the one that moved in during PvZ Adventures, the Facebook game, but he died sometime after that. And Dave, in his descent to madness, continued to talk to his neighbor. Now this is where it gets even more crazy. Off to the next one in the timeline, PvZ 2. Plants vs. Zombies 2, It's About Time. As I said before, this is where it gets a little bit more crazy. First, this marks the beginning of Penny, the time machine, a sentient hodgepodge of cars that acts as a comic foil to Crazy Dave. You know when your anchor character is a talking car that you're in for a ride. Get it? A ride? Cause she's a car? Ha! Jokes! Anyways, having a time machine really complicates things. I think this is actually where we get into two separate realities. Yes, we're going into separate realities. One being the one that we play in, where Zomboss takes over every era. And Dave is setting out to retake the world. Time to take another look at the trailer! No sign of a neighbor being taken with Dave, but it starts with the same house. And later in the game, before a Zomboss battle, Zomboss reveals that Penny gives off the same temporal signature as his time machine, suggesting that she's made with parts from his lab. When Penny asks Dave about the legitimacy of this claim, Dave completely ignores her. If you played the game for yourself, you'd notice that Zomboss says something to try to discredit Dave before every Zomboss fight. But this one stands out as the only one where you don't end up disproving Zomboss. Instead, they have a moment where Penny again asks Dave if she's Zomboss's daughter, only to be ignored once again by Dave. And now it's time for the final game in the timeline so far. Plants vs. Zombies, Garden Warfare. Finally, we're at the biggest departure from the lane defense strategy game that started it all. A third-person shooter with two armies fighting in a suburban battlefield. You may have noticed immediately that the architecture is a bit different than our world. And you could totally chalk that up to, okay, it's a more cartoony game, whatever. But what about the huge monuments to both plants and zombies? That has to mean something. At first I thought, well, the plants are the saviors of the world, or whatever. Of course they would have monuments. But then, what happened to the people that built the statues? There's no signs of people after the Facebook game except for Dave. And why are there zombie statues? The lights are still on, and the buildings are not damaged, so that implies that the fight started recently. If you look closely, you'll notice the signs are often misspelled, as if a zombie created them. So this seems to me like it's a world that was inhabited by zombies and plants, and then the war started recently. Penny already exists in this world, there's no signs of life, and Dave has a mansion now. So this definitely puts it after PvZ2, where he still had his house. My theory suggests that Dave and Zomboss, both traveling through time, messing everything up, has changed the world so that it's inhabited by plants and zombies from the start. Making it so that this current version of the world, which is pretty much like a mid-50s style society with those fancy looking cars that remind me of freaking Fallout, the plants revere Dave as a god, and the zombies follow Zomboss. But it seems to me as if they probably were living together until Dave and Zomboss returned from their time-traveling exploits and brought with them a new war, and that's where Garden Warfare takes place. And now it's time for the final theory! Dave and Zomboss were co-founders of Doom and Bloom Seed Co., which are the seed packets that you see in the first game. Dave was creating a fog for use on crops that would cause the plants to regenerate, causing them to regrow faster, and thus generate more yield, more food. Dave and Zomboss had a falling out, and Zomboss altered the fog to work on people, making the corpses reanimate. He then released the fog, but Dave learned of this betrayal and created the blowers to keep his house safe. Dave then worked on genetically modifying the plants using the same formula, giving the plants the ability to fight using the regeneration to their advantage. By, for example, a pea shooter shooting a pea, then regenerating it instantly in order to shoot another. It would seem that the regeneration is limited to the crop's yield based on the fact that they don't regenerate health all the way, but have unlimited ammunition, which would be the food in the case of normal produce. And the fact that the zombies don't show full recovery, they only reanimate from the dead. Dave started a small colony of people trying to survive after Zomboss released the fog. But the losses over time started taking a toll on Dave, making him descend into madness. Until he was the lone survivor of an apocalypse he had a part in. Speaking to the remains of his last neighbor long after his passing, then creates a time machine, maybe to stop it all before it even happens. Then, as he meanders across time fighting zombies at every era he stumbles into, until finally altering time so badly that the era in PvZ1 is now a world that has always been populated by plants and zombies in an alternate reality. Then again, I may be overthinking it, so take it with a grain of salt. I'm sure there's plenty of plot holes, whatever, in this theory, but this is pretty much what I've got. Hell, I'll probably be adding on to it later on. Not sure, but hope you enjoyed the video.